All right, so let's dive into all this.
Okay.
You sent over some fascinating sources on the recent U.S. election,
Yeah.
Donald Trump's victory certification.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a real mix here.
Right.
Online discussions,
Yeah.
news articles, and even some international viewpoints.
Yeah, it's particularly interesting given the timing.
Yeah.
Only 4 years after the events of January 6th.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So our mission here
Yeah.
is to try to understand the different reactions
Right.
to what seems to be a peaceful transition of power.
Right.
And what it all might mean for the future of American democracy.
Yeah.
What were some of your initial thoughts as you looked through these materials?
I think the contrast between this certification and the one in 2021 was really striking.
Yeah.
I mean, Kamala Harris, the outgoing vice president, declared Trump the winner
Right.
after a remarkably streamlined process.
Yeah.
And there weren't any objections from Congress.
Right.
A far cry from the chaos we saw 4 years ago.
You're right. It was surprisingly smooth.
Yeah. The sources even mentioned that the 2025 certification process was significantly shorter.
Yeah.
Do we know how it was streamlined?
Yeah, a few articles touch on that.
Okay.
It seems that several procedural changes were implemented in the wake of January 6th,
Okay.
really aimed at preventing any disruption and clarifying the vice president's role.
Right.
And these changes were highly debated at the time.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah.
So outwardly, it's a peaceful transition.
Right.
But looking deeper at the reactions, we see anything but peace.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
Okay.
There's a sharp divide,
Yeah.
some express relief,
Uh-huh.
seeing this as a sign of a functioning democracy.
Yeah.
They praise Harris for her professionalism.
Yeah.
Even Mike Pence,
Okay.
despite his own history with Trump, congratulated him and his running mate Vance on their win.
Yeah, it does seem like a portion of the population is breathing a sigh of relief
Right.
that, at least on the surface, the system worked as intended.
Yeah. But underneath that relief,
Okay.
there's a lot of tension.
A significant number of people expressed deep disappointment and concern about Trump's return to power.
Yeah.
They view it as a failure of the democratic system,
Right.
pointing to his past actions and the potential for further damage.
It's almost as if some folks believe the system worked,
Yeah.
but delivered the wrong outcome.
Yeah.
And they're really struggling with what that means.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Some even criticize the Democrats for being too passive in accepting the results.
Yeah.
They question why there wasn't more pushback.
It seems the ghost of January 6th looms large here.
It's unavoidable.
Yeah, we see it directly referenced in a lot of these discussions.
Yeah, some see the peaceful certification as a direct contrast to the violence of that day,
Okay.
proof that the insurrection ultimately failed to disrupt the democratic process.
A sign of resilience, maybe?
Perhaps, but many others view it differently.
Okay.
They argue that the lack of serious consequences for those involved in the January 6th attack actually paved the way for Trump's victory. They say it set a dangerous precedent.
So to them, the system didn't work.
Right.
Or at least didn't learn the right lessons from its near failure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that feeds into a broader sense of unease about the future
Okay.
that permeates a lot of these comments. There's a palpable fear about the direction the country is headed.
And they're not just vague fears, right?
Yeah.
What concrete concerns are being raised?
People are worried about negative impacts on a wide range of issues. The economy,
Right.
social programs,
Mm.
environmental policies.
Yeah.
It runs the gamut.
Yeah.
There's a lot of anxiety bubbling beneath the surface.
Yeah.
This feeling that this election wasn't just about choosing a president,
Right.
but about choosing a path for the nation.
Okay, so we've got this undercurrent of tension, even dread,
Right.
in the U.S.
Yeah.
But what about the international perspective?
Right.
The independent piece you included gives a British take on all this.
Yeah, it's interesting. They describe the certification as a return to order and civility. But they also point out the underlying tension
Right.
and the symbolism of Harris having to certify her own defeat.
It's a powerful image, isn't it?
Yeah.
On the surface, just a procedural step,
Right.
but it carries so much weight given the circumstances.
It really encapsulates the complex emotions of this moment.
Yeah.
The world is watching, recognizing the outward stability,
Right.
but also sensing the deeper anxieties at play.
And that tension really comes through in the online discussions.
Yeah.
It feels like people are trying to make sense of this new reality,
Mm-hmm.
grappling with what it means for their own lives and
Yeah.
for the country as a whole.
Yes. And those attempts to make sense of things lead to some very pointed observations.
Okay.
One commenter draws a comparison between Republican and Democrat reactions,
Yeah.
highlighting the fact that Democrats didn't storm the Capitol
Right.
when they lost in previous elections.
It is a stark contrast,
Yeah.
and another commenter sarcastically pointed out the irony of Republicans suddenly going silent about election fraud now that their candidate has won.
It does raise questions about the role of trust
Yeah.
in democratic systems.
Right.
If one side consistently questions the legitimacy of elections,
Right.
it erodes the foundation of the entire system.
And several comments expressed shock at the lack of outrage and action
Right.
from those who view Trump as a threat to democracy.
Yeah.
They're asking, why aren't people doing more to resist?
There's a sense of disillusionment,
Yeah.
a feeling that the fight for democracy has lost momentum.
Right.
Many are struggling to understand how to move forward
Okay.
in a political landscape that feels so uncertain and potentially volatile.
It's like everyone's holding their breath, waiting to see what happens next.
Right.
Now, before we dive into the more philosophical implications of all of this,
Yeah.
let's take a closer look at some of the specific fears and anxieties being expressed in these discussions.
Yeah.
What are people most worried about in a practical sense?
There's a lot of talk about potential policy changes,
Okay.
particularly concerning social issues and public education.
Right.
There's a real fear that progress made in these areas could be rolled back and that vulnerable populations will be disproportionately affected.
And there are also concerns about the spread of misinformation
Right.
and the erosion of trust in institutions.
Yeah.
Some comments directly link these trends to Trump's victory, arguing that a less informed and more divided electorate is more susceptible to manipulation.
Those are certainly valid concerns.
Yeah.
The role of education and critical thinking in a democracy cannot be overstated.
Right.
And of course, the role of a free and independent press is crucial as well. There's a lot of discussion about the need for reliable information and accountability.
Yeah.
In the face of what some see as an increasingly polarized and potentially volatile media landscape.
It's almost as if people are trying to find their footing in a world that suddenly feels a lot less stable.
Yeah.
And they're looking for guidance, for answers,
Yeah.
for some sense of hope.
And that search for hope, for a way forward,
Okay.
is perhaps the most powerful theme running through all of this.
Yeah.
It's clear that people are deeply invested in the future of American democracy,
Right.
even as they grapple with its imperfections and uncertainties.
It's a complex picture for sure.
Yeah.
We've got relief mixed with fear, hope, battling against despair.
Right.
And it all plays out against the backdrop of a nation still reckoning with the trauma of January 6th.
And that reckoning,
Yeah.
that process of confronting our past and imagining our future, is ultimately what this deep dive is all about.
Right.
It's about understanding the complexities of this moment, acknowledging the challenges, and seeking out those glimmers of hope
Yeah.
that might guide us toward a more just and equitable future.
Well said.
Huh.
And with that in mind, let's shift gears a bit and explore some of those glimmers of hope.
Right.
What are people suggesting as potential paths forward? How are they envisioning a future where democracy not only survives, but thrives?
One recurring theme is the importance of continued engagement.
Okay.
Despite the disillusionment, many people are emphasizing the need for continued participation in the political process, from voting to activism
Right.
to simply staying informed.
It's like they're saying don't give up.
Exactly.
Okay.
There's a sense that apathy and disengagement are the enemies of democracy,
Yeah.
and that even small acts of participation can make a difference.
And what about those who are feeling overwhelmed, even paralyzed by the current situation?
Right.
What advice are people offering to them?
There's a lot of talk about self-care
Okay.
and community building.
Yeah.
People are encouraging each other to find ways to stay grounded, to connect with like-minded individuals,
Okay.
and to build support networks.
Yeah.
They're recognizing that navigating these challenging times
Right.
requires resilience both individually and collectively.
And there's also a strong emphasis on education and critical thinking, isn't there?
Absolutely.
Okay.
People are stressing the importance of media literacy,
Yeah.
of being able to discern fact from fiction,
Right.
and of developing the skills to evaluate information critically.
Yeah.
They see this as essential for combating misinformation
Okay.
and for making informed decisions in an increasingly complex world.
It's like they're saying knowledge is power.
Yes, and with that power comes responsibility.
Okay.
The responsibility to stay informed, to engage in thoughtful dialogue,
Yeah.
and to hold those in power accountable.
And ultimately to shape the future of democracy.
Exactly.
Now, as we move into the next part of our deep dive,
Okay.
I want to focus on something that keeps popping up in these discussions.
Yeah.
The idea of an uneven playing field.
It's a thought-provoking concept,
Yeah.
and it gets to the heart of some fundamental questions about the future of American democracy.
Exactly. So stay tuned as we explore this idea in more detail. What does it mean for one side to consistently accept election results while the other only does so when they win?
Right.
Is this sustainable?
Good question.
And what are the potential consequences for the long-term health of our democracy?
Right.
So we've been exploring this idea of an uneven playing field.
Right.
This concern that one side consistently accepts election results while the other only seems to do so when their candidate wins.
Right.
It's a pretty serious accusation.
It is.
And one that pops up a lot in these sources.
It taps into a deeper anxiety about whether democratic norms are being eroded.
Yeah.
I mean, if a significant portion of the population only views elections as legitimate when their side wins,
Right.
that undermines the whole concept of a peaceful transfer of power.
Right. It becomes less about the will of the people and more about
Yeah.
who's willing to play by a different set of rules.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that can have a corrosive effect on democratic institutions.
Okay.
You know, if people lose faith in the fairness of elections,
Yeah.
they might be less likely to participate in the political process altogether.
Right.
Or worse, they might be drawn to more extreme measures.
There's a comment here that captures this sentiment perfectly.
Yeah.
It simply says, why bother anymore?
Wow.
You can almost feel the disillusionment dripping from those words.
That sense of disillusionment is a recurring theme in these discussions.
Yeah.
And it's not just about feeling like your vote doesn't matter.
Right.
It's a deeper sense of powerlessness.
Okay.
A feeling that the system itself is rigged against you.
And that feeling can be incredibly dangerous, right?
Absolutely.
It can lead to apathy,
Yeah.
cynicism, and even, as you mentioned, a willingness to embrace more extreme solutions.
Absolutely. And it's something that those who believe in democracy need to take seriously.
Yeah.
We can't just dismiss these concerns as sour grapes or sore losers.
Right.
We have to acknowledge the very real anxieties that people are feeling and address the underlying issues that are contributing to this sense of an uneven playing field.
So how do we do that?
Right.
Where do we even begin?
For starters, I think we need to have an honest conversation about the role of misinformation and propaganda
Okay.
in our political discourse.
Yeah.
We see a lot of concern in these sources about the spread of false information, particularly online. And there's a sense that this has contributed to the erosion of trust in institutions
Yeah.
and the rise of more extreme viewpoints.
Several comments specifically mention the need for better media literacy education to help people develop the critical thinking skills necessary to navigate this increasingly complex information landscape.
That's crucial.
Okay.
We need to equip people with the tools to evaluate information critically, to recognize bias, and to distinguish between fact and opinion.
Right.
But it's not just about individual responsibility.
Okay.
We also need to consider the role of social media platforms and other information gatekeepers in shaping public discourse.
There's definitely a sense that these platforms need to do more to combat the spread of misinformation and to promote a more balanced and nuanced conversation.
Right. And then there's the question of how we address the underlying issues of inequality and injustice that often fuel political polarization.
Yeah.
Many of the concerns expressed in these sources go beyond specific policies or candidates.
Right.
They speak to a deeper sense of unfairness, a feeling that the system isn't working for everyone.
One comment that really stuck with me said, it's not just about who wins or loses.
Right.
It's about who gets to play the game at all.
That's a good one.
That really gets at the heart of this idea of an uneven playing field.
It does.
Yeah.
And it suggests that addressing this problem requires more than just tweaking electoral rules or fact-checking websites.
Yeah.
It requires a deeper societal reckoning with the systemic issues that create and perpetuate inequalities.
It sounds like we're talking about a pretty fundamental shift in how we think about democracy.
Yeah.
It's not just about casting a vote every few years.
Right.
It's about creating a system where everyone has a fair chance to participate and have their voices heard.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that requires a commitment to justice, fairness, and equality
Right.
that goes far beyond the realm of politics.
Okay.
It's about building a society where everyone has the opportunity to thrive,
Yeah.
regardless of their background beliefs or circumstances.
It's a tall order.
It is.
But it seems like a lot of people are ready for that conversation.
Yeah.
They're hungry for solutions, for a way forward that's more just and equitable.
And that's where the real hope lies.
Okay.
Despite the challenges we've been discussing,
Uh-huh.
there's also a sense of determination, a belief that we can build a better future
Yeah.
if we're willing to work together.
It's like they're saying, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Precisely. We need to recognize that democracy is an ongoing process, a work in progress.
Right.
And even though we may never achieve a perfect system,
Yeah.
we can always strive to make it better.
So how do we channel that energy, that desire for change into concrete action?
Well,
What are some specific steps that individuals can take to address this issue of an uneven playing field?
first and foremost, I think it starts with education.
Okay.
We need to learn about the history of inequality in this country,
Uh-huh.
understand the systemic forces that perpetuate it,
Right.
and become aware of our own biases and blind spots.
And then there's the question of how we engage with those who hold different viewpoints.
Right.
How do we have productive conversations about these complex issues?
It's a crucial question.
Yeah, without resorting to anger and division.
And there are no easy answers,
Right.
but I think it starts with listening,
Okay.
with trying to understand where others are coming from,
Uh-huh.
even if we disagree with them.
It's about recognizing that we're all part of the same society, even if we don't always see eye to eye on everything.
And that we have a shared responsibility to create a future
Right.
where everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
So it sounds like we're talking about a multifaceted approach.
Yes.
It's about individual education and action,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also about systemic change,
Right.
about addressing the root causes of inequality and injustice.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And it's a long-term project.
Yeah.
It's not something that's going to happen overnight.
Right.
But every step we take in the right direction, every conversation we have,
Mm-hmm.
every act of kindness and understanding
Yeah.
brings us closer to that goal.
And I think that's a really important message to leave our listeners with.
Yeah.
Yes, there are challenges.
Yeah.
Yes, there are reasons to be concerned,
Huh.
but there's also reason for hope.
Right.
And there are things that each of us can do to make a difference.
Exactly. Democracy is not a spectator sport.
Right.
It requires active participation, critical thinking, and a willingness to engage with those who hold different viewpoints.
Yeah.
And it's a process that's never truly finished.
Yeah.
A journey that requires constant vigilance and renewal.
Well said. And it's a journey that we as citizens have to embark on together.
Yes.
Because the future of American democracy depends on our collective engagement
Right.
and our willingness to uphold the values that underpin it.
It's about remembering that democracy is not a guarantee,
Okay.
but a choice we make every day through our actions, our words,
Yeah.
and our commitment to building a more just and equitable society.
And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this part of our deep dive.
Okay.
We've covered a lot of ground,
Yeah.
from the specifics of the election certification
Mhm.
to the broader implications for the future of American democracy.
Right.
But before we go, I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
This idea that democracy is an ongoing process,
Right.
a journey rather than a destination. Looking through these sources, do you see any signs of how that journey might unfold in the years to come?
Well, it's hard to predict the future, of course,
Right.
but I think we can glean some insights
Okay.
from the way people are responding to this particular moment.
Yeah.
One thing that stands out is a sense of cautious optimism.
Uh-huh.
Yes, there's a lot of anxiety and uncertainty,
Right.
but there's also a willingness to engage, to find solutions to make things better.
I'm picking up on that too.
Yeah.
It's not blind faith,
Right.
but a determination to learn from the past and shape a more hopeful future.
Exactly. And that active engagement is crucial.
Yeah.
We see it in the calls for increased civic participation,
Right.
the emphasis on education and critical thinking,
Wow.
and the efforts to build bridges across ideological divides.
There's one comment that really exemplifies this spirit.
Yeah.
It says, we can't afford to be complacent. We have to keep fighting for the kind of future we want.
That's the essence of it, isn't it? Democracy demands our constant attention and participation.
Right.
It's not a system that runs on autopilot.
And it seems like people are recognizing that
Yeah.
they're not just waiting for someone else to fix things.
Right.
They're stepping up, raising their voices, and demanding better from their leaders and from each other.
And that's incredibly encouraging.
Yeah.
It suggests that despite the challenges, The spirit of democracy is still very much alive.
I'm also struck by the number of comments that focus on the need for empathy and understanding.
Yeah.
It seems like people are recognizing that demonizing the other side isn't going to solve anything.
It's a crucial realization.
Right.
We need to move beyond the us versus them mentality
Yeah.
that has become so pervasive in our political discourse.
Right.
We have to start seeing each other as fellow citizens,
Yeah.
even when we disagree.
One commenter put it this way.
Okay.
We may not always agree,
Yeah.
but we all want what's best for our country.
And finding that common ground, that shared sense of purpose, is essential if we're going to address the complex challenges we face as a nation.
So it sounds like we're talking about a shift in mindset.
Yeah.
A move away from division and towards a more collaborative approach to problem solving.
Precisely.
Okay.
And that shift requires a willingness to listen, to learn, and to be open to different perspectives.
Yeah.
It's not about abandoning our principles or compromising our values,
Right.
but rather about finding ways to work together towards a common goal.
And that goal ultimately is a stronger, more just, and more equitable democracy.
A democracy that reflects the will of the people, protects the rights of all citizens, and ensures equal opportunity for everyone to succeed.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
what would you say is the most important takeaway for our listener? What's the one thing you hope they'll remember long after this conversation is over?
I think the most important takeaway is that the future of American democracy is in our hands.
Okay.
It's up to each of us to be informed, to engage in thoughtful dialogue, and to hold our leaders accountable. It's a responsibility we can't afford to take lightly.
It's about recognizing that democracy is a precious and fragile thing, and that it requires our constant care and attention.
Exactly. And it's also about remembering that even in the face of challenges, there is always hope.
Yeah.
There's always the possibility for progress, for renewal, for a brighter future.
Well said. And with that, we'll leave our listener with one final thought to ponder.
Okay.
What role will you play in shaping the future of American democracy?
It's a question we should all be asking ourselves.
Yeah.
Because the answer lies not in grand gestures or sweeping pronouncements,
Right.
but in the small, everyday choices we make,
Uh-huh.
the conversations we have, the information we consume, the actions we take.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
My pleasure.
We hope it has given you a better understanding of the complexities and challenges facing our nation.
Yes.
And most importantly, we hope it has inspired you to engage in the ongoing conversation about what it means to be a citizen in a democracy.